What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 89 of Nintendo Noise, Flip Screen Games' weekly Nintendo podcast. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined, as always, by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Max Wright.
Ahoy, ahoy, and I'm really feeling it.
You should be feeling it, because this is your show today, Max. So much so, I put you on the left side. Usually that's where the host You're in the hot seat today, all right? Because today we're talking all about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed, your review in progress. Obviously, you are in the midst of what I'm sure is a very large piece of DLC, and we'll get into all the nitty-gritty of that, as well as a little broader talk I want to have with you about Nintendo's overall DLC strategy, because
I'm open to a conversation about things. Yeah. That's okay with me.
I think it's gonna be a good one, and of course we've got a ton of questions from all of y'all over in the question block, and honestly, we'll see if we get them to all of them today, because there's a ton, and some of them are good and meaty. So it's gonna be a good show. I'm looking forward to it, and let's jump right into it with the Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed impressions thus far, Max. So to kick things off, just for those who don't know, right, if you're a new listener, if you weren't around for our conversations around Xenoblade Chronicles 3 last year, Max, just quickly give people like the elevator pitch for your relationship to Xenoblade. Which ones have you played? Did you complete Xenoblade Chronicles 3 last year? If so, how did it kind of land on your overall Game of the Year list?
So I played Xenoblade Chronicles 1 on the Wii. Not when it came out. I think it was a couple of years after it came out. And then, I was a big fan of the game. I then played it through again on PC and sort of told a bunch of friends to do the same if they didn't want to have to track down a copy, because quite hard to find at that point. It was quite expensive.
For years Chronicles, it was like very, very hard to. It was like very out of print, right?
Yeah, in America specifically, it was a GameStop exclusive, and then it was also like
I forgot about that.
I think it got added to the online or something, and the price dropped quite a bit. So not to the online, added to you could download it as opposed to having to just buy it. The similar sort of thing happened to Metroid Prime Trilogy as well. So when they announced, because I'd sort of played that, and when Xenoblade Chronicles X came out, I played it for sort of 5 or 6 hours. Didn't really grab me, and I was like, all right, okay, maybe it was a one-off then. But when they announced the second one, which very much seemed a lot more like the first one during the first Switch event in January of 2017. I was like
2017.
Yeah, 2017. It's in the future. I was locked in. I was like automatically ready for it, and I was really excited for it. And that game, I remember sort of around Christmas, I spent about just 100 hours just lost in the world of All Rest and sort of loving that game. The first one I think was still sort of nearer and dearer to me. So then sort of a year later, when the DLC for that game came out, I immediately fell back in love with that. I think it's like that's a really great piece of like standalone DLC content, and I highly recommend if you have played 2 and you haven't played Torn of the Golden Country, I highly recommend picking that up. You can pick it up physically too and sort of separate, so you don't have to spend your money on data. You can spend it on plastic instead. And yes, to answer your question, I did complete Xenoblade Chronicles 3 last year. I really enjoyed that game. I really there were bits of it like towards the end where I was like, like I feel this is a bit of a cop out for like the final boss kind of thing.
Okay.
But still, like the ending, it did exactly what I wanted it to do in so many ways. The ending got a few tears out of me, and I was like ready for this expansion. I've been waiting since then, basically, for them to release this sort of expansion. As for where it ranked on my Game of the Year, when we had our conversation in December about what our Games of the Year was, I ranked it number 5. You and I looked up yesterday. But then again, last year was sort of pretty hot year. We had Elden Ring, we had God of War Ragnarok.
I think that speaks more to the quality of the other games that came out last year than it, like being in the top 5. Still very respectable, right?
Yes.
Like that's in a year that includes Elden Ring and Ragnarok. That's being anywhere on that top 10 is good.
Exactly, and it's a damn fine game, so I'm very excited.
So context established here, right? You're a Xenoblade guy. You've enjoyed all the main entries. You were real into 3. You got really into the story and the cast of 3. So I want to kind of get an idea of how Future Redeemed fits into that, because I played the first maybe 20, 30 hours of Xenoblade 3 last year and enjoyed it quite a bit before I got pulled away from other stuff. And obviously, in a game that large, that's almost nothing. So, whatever.
Yeah, well, yeah. You probably got maybe a third of the way in.
Yeah,
maybe.
right. Like I scratched the surface on it. I got in there. I enjoyed it, but I a lot of other stuff was kind of vying for my attention at the time.
Of course.
And I am interested in understanding what the relationship of Future Redeemed is to Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Like, how does it fit into the timeline? Like, how does its story relate to Xenoblade Chronicles 3? And then I guess, how big of a expansion is this? Is this like, you said, right, that the expansion for Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was like very meaty, very sizable, substantial. Is this like big enough that when we get to Game of the Year at the end of the year, this is a thing that you could see maybe arguing for being on a top 10? Or does it feel more just like, hey, if you loved Xenoblade Chronicles 3, this is a cool epilogue and you're going to get some more time with these characters and some more time with this world and these systems?
So I'm leaning towards the latter at the moment of like, because I think so where I am now is I think I'm fairly near to the end of like, I'm pretty sure that I'm going towards like the final chapter of the game. But there's still like loads to do in the world and stuff. How it relates to the main sort of game story is it takes place. I think it's roughly like 70, possibly 100 years before Xenoblade Chronicles 3 starts.
Oh.
I don't know if you ever got as far as the city, but in the city there's a you know how the six characters, they're all Ouroboros, and they like share the power between the six of them. Well, when you eventually reach the city in Xenoblade Chronicles 3, they mention about how many years before the city was founded by
Yes. Okay.
or the city in its current form was founded by founded by a group of Ouroboros from decades past. And there's like a memorial and there's statues of all of these six characters. Those characters are the ones that you are playing as here. So
interesting. Okay. So that's okay. So it's more of a prequel than it is like an epilogue or anything like that.
Now, some of the characters I won't explain because that is spoilers,
right?
In terms of like the sort of the main character and like his companion, that's quite spoilery. There's also like another Agni and another Kavesi, who are the two warring factions that sort of like they are freed from their flame clocks, as you spend most of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 doing, and they're sort of like suddenly been forced into this world of all we've ever known is fighting, all we've ever known is sort of struggling to survive, and now I'm sort of like free. But the other two characters, who I'm pretty sure, I need to go back and check, I'm waiting to finish the game before I do. I'm pretty certain in the statues, they were always in the statues, they just had different names because the characters refer to them as like nicknames as opposed to like their actual names. But this is in the trailer, so it's not going to spoil much, but it is Shulk from Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and Rex from Xenoblade Chronicles 2. So there's a lot in this that's like, not only is it a prologue to Xenoblade Chronicles 3, it's an epilogue to the first two games as well.
So it kind of sounds like it's maybe trying to like tie up some of the loose ends and kind of bring all those different timelines together a little bit.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily that it's loose ends because it adds brand new content. Like, the games were finished and their stories ended as they ended. There was no like questions. There was no like, okay, I don't want to spoil the first two games actually, but like the game ends and the characters are all happy and everything's great. The ones that sort of survive.
So is it like more like context, I guess, for those things?
I think it's just new stuff. Like it's like okay. It's now for them. It's like been 30 years since their respective games have ended. They've had, they've settled down. They've had kids. They've been married and stuff like that. And then the events of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 at the end, you sort of, when you get the whole like, this is what's happened in the world. This is how the world is the way that it is. Sort of like the beginning of that world. You sort of see how they fold into it and how their lives have been affected by it. And yeah, so yeah, hopefully none of that is too spoilery because it was in the trailer that they're in it. So yeah, I would say it is definitely like a side story. It's not, but I think if you're a fan of Xenoblade and you've been a fan of the previous games, or you just want the full context for Xenoblade Chronicles 3, then yes, I highly recommend playing it. And it's a shame it's not physically, but yeah, I think it's definitely one worth playing.
It's so interesting to me because, like, as somebody who's like very, very on the outside of Xenoblade, right? Like having only played, maybe like a third of 3, talking to folks who like have played the whole series, like from the outside anyway, the lore seems so complicated. Like it feels like it's like akin to like
you said
like
this
a Kingdom Hearts or like a Metal Gear or something like that, where it's just like, what is going
not that
on?
complex. It's definitely not that complex because, without spoiling anything, there really is just like there's like one timeline splits one way for Xenoblade Chronicles 1, splits another way for Xenoblade Chronicles 2. 3 is at the bottom somewhere, but the stories aren't like intertwined, and it's not like, oh, this thing's been introduced. It's very clear cut. Like there is a split, and then they come back together for 3.
And it's like, I'm sure you can't answer this question without spoiling things, but like you say that, I don't understand how that's possible. And then all of the characters there are characters from 1, 2, and 3 all in this DLC. That doesn't make sense to me.
Do you know what you need to do is play Xenoblade Chronicles 1?
I'm sure it does, but
just play Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and then play Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and it will make sense to you. Now, which I guess is also, you could say, play all 7 Kingdom Hearts games and everything will make sense. But if you want, when we finish recording, I'll give you a brief description of what I mean by it. Those that have played the games will understand, maybe. But if you ever intend on playing the games, I won't do that because I don't want to spoil it for you.
It's like it's so tough because like I want to play them, like they interest me, but I think it's like the time investment is really big for sure. Massive. And I think the thing about them that I struggled with a little bit, I think in 3 was like, okay, this game is absolutely massive, and there's so much side content to do, and it's impossible to know what side content is like really like the good meaty stuff. So it's like I feel like I want to do everything, and then doing everything takes a long time. And
the fact that I did 100 hours of like 1 and 2, and I did all the side quests in 1 on my Switch playthrough, but in 2, when I booted up 2, whenever I think it was when I got the OLED Switch, I was like, let's just try some games out, and I booted up 2 for the first time in, that would have been like what, 4 or 5 years. I was like, wow, like I don't understand any of this. I've got so many quests I didn't do, so many blades I haven't upgraded, so many like blade quests I haven't done, and then there was all these blades being like the weapons that are also characters, so many charts to fill out that then unlock more stories and quest lines and stuff. And I was like, wow, there's so much content in this game that I never touched, but I still did 100 hours and feel like I'd have my fill. So yeah.
And I think the other thing that ended up getting in my way a little bit too is like the performance in handheld mode just not being what I wanted it to be, right? Like it being like stuck at like 540 for Xenoblade 3, and it was like, damn, like I want to chip away at side stuff in handheld mode, like at night, chilling in bed or whatever, and it became like, oh, I can only play this on TV, which was then like, okay, so this is like the only game I'm playing, and I
it
just,
is a shame,
but it's like, go ahead.
I think that's a huge delay.
Okay. Go here. Let me make a note, and I'll cut here. But you were saying it's a shame.
Okay, cool. 1,
2.
Okay, no, it's too big.
Still long?
Yeah, really long. 1,
2.
Yeah, obscene. I just don't understand what it could be. I don't have an update running. I don't have anything downloading anywhere. My network is... I mean, it doesn't make any sense that it's at 0%, to be honest.
Fuck.
I just can't imagine what could be going on. 1.
2.
No, it's huge. Okay, let's just go like quick. I'll do 1, you do 2, I'll do 1, I'll do 2. So 1.
2.
1.
2.
1. That's huge.
2. Yeah, it's really long.
I just don't know if it's because it seems like the internet is fast. It's just not stable. Is there a way we can change the server on here? Maybe doesn't Steve usually try that?
We can. Hello.
Hello.
1
2
1
2
1
2. That's better.
Wanna try it?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay.
Oh, what was the line?
You were about to say it's a shame. I was talking about like performance issues
Oh, yeah,
and stuff.
yeah,
If
yeah.
you don't remember what you were going to say, I can finish my thought and then you can.
Yeah,
jump
go on.
off
Yeah,
a
do
new
your
one.
thought. Yeah.
So yeah, it just kind of became this thing where it was like the only game I could play at that time, and I wanted something that was like a little bit more gamey, I guess, right? Than like kind of the min-maxy spreadsheety RPG, which I like, but the idea of like committing to 300 plus hours of that to get the whole narrative, I just struggle to think of when I'm gonna find the time and if I can get it to play the way I want to play it.
When you put it like that, that is a lot of time to put into something. But it is a shame that the games none of the games run very well in handheld mode at all. But the games are gorgeous docked. They're these huge worlds. They're seamless in some ways. They perform fine, not great, but they perform, fine. I think they look great, and I think the world design's really interesting, and the colors and the design.
The style is insane. Yeah, like I know obviously Monolith Soft is best known for the Xenoblade series, but like they also kind of famously contribute to the background art in Zelda, and it's like you can see that, right? Like you playing Xenoblade, you're like, this is the most beautiful game on Switch, at least in that style, in that kind of like 3D open world, right? Because
they know
obviously
how to
something
do
like Metroid Dread is pretty in its own right.
Oh yeah, they know how to do great world design and also great sense of scale. Like in Xenoblade Chronicles 1, you've always got these looming, parts of these huge gigantic titans that you live on, and you can always see in the background, you can see the opposing titan. And in Titans from Xenoblade Chronicles 2. In Xenoblade Chronicles 2, when you're on like the giraffe-shaped titan, for example, you can see its head like move and stuff like that, and you're like, wow, like look at this gigantic mountainous head, and I'm on its back, and I feel like I'm on its back, and they've just got this great way of doing it with scale. And I do think some of that was actually lost in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. There isn't that, while the world is huge and there are like bits of the world you see, you see the Orion Titan, the whale head, you see that there's Mechonis sword in the background, you see certain things, and you're like, this is huge, but there's nothing tying it together like I'm on these living, breathing worlds. And I think that's just because of the story of 3 and how that world is created.
I do like how it has that sense of scale, though, with like there'll be an environment and you'll see an area and you're like, oh, I can't get there yet, but like when you learn the map and kind of like how to navigate it as you're leveling up and gaining new abilities and new ways to interact with the environment. And like again, the sense of scale of like there being really big scary monsters that you're like, I can't fight you yet, but I will. Then you get that sense of like, oh, now I can beat this one easily. And
you go
like
back
that
and
sense
the music,
of progression
the
is really
guitars
good
kick
too.
in, like
yeah,
great.
God, the music, really, really good.
I think that's one of the strong points of all Xenoblade games is the music.
So to take it back to Future Redeemed a little bit, I know you said that you feel like you're kind of getting near the end of the game. Right, so how many hours in are you? How sizable is it?
So I'm actually currently about 13 hours in, which yesterday or the day before, whenever it was, when I wrote this yesterday morning, this little list here that I'm going to sort of go through of bits I want to talk about, I was roughly 6 or 7 hours in. So over the course of like yesterday, between us recording and then last night after we recorded, and then today, like when I got in from work, I've just been glued to this game, and I've managed to just really like pull a load of time out of it. I didn't think it was going to I don't think I was going to have much time to play games this weekend. I didn't think I was going to have much time because I had like a wedding to go to, and I had to sort of spend time with the bride and groom afterwards, and then like recovery time, and then with like work and stuff like that with a long weekend, work builds up. But I've been glued to this, and where it's been on the Switch, I've been quite happily pulling it out somewhere, playing 20 minutes, playing half an hour, and then that seems to add up.
Hey,
Yeah,
sorry about that, guys. Technical issues abound on this episode, apparently, but so we were audio only for a few minutes there. We're back on video now, so apologies for the transition there. But here, Max, please continue.
Oh, so as I was saying before, I was so rudely interrupted by technology. Where it's been on the Switch, and I've been able to sort of take 3 or 4. I'll take 10 minutes here, or I'll sort of like be in bed playing it or whatever. I've been able to sort of get a sizable amount of this, and it's just very addictive. And I feel like it's taken me right back into it does a good job of reintroducing you to, because I haven't played this game since like June. It's been like 6 months. I've played loads
Sure.
of things since then, right? And there's so many features and so many systems to remember, right? That it does a good job of introducing. It does a good job of being an expansion where it's watered down a lot of the systems to, like, instead of it being, because it's a 100-hour adventure, instead of it having 6 characters and then each of those characters has their own class, but also there's 15 other characters and they have their own class, and you can swap classes around, and characters can have different classes and they can level classes up. Basically, it's just you have 6 characters, and all 6 of those characters are they have their own classes, and they are those classes and they never change.
They're locked into that.
Yeah, which I think the previous DLC did a similar thing where it very much focuses on the new stuff that's introduced, and it waters down, not in a bad way, but like, instead of being the full 100-hour RPG, the last game, Torn of the Golden Country, was about 30 hours, and it was very much the same sort of system. You have your blade, you have your followers, but instead of being able to swap and change and have like 100 blades, and then you can swap between them, it's just like they have their blade and that's that. And it's very much the same with this one. You have your partner, you have your Ouroboros partner, um, you have your set of arts, and you play the game. So what was the original question? Because it's been quite a while now. I feel like I've gone on a massive tangent.
So yeah, my original question was like the how far in are you at this point, and
wow, okay.
yeah, but it's cool because you got to where I wanted to go with some of the other stuff anyway. So you mentioned just now that like this game does a good job of kind of like getting you back into the gameplay loop, which was one of the things I was wondering about, and that it's kind of putting more emphasis on what's new and kind of paring back the stuff that you're already familiar with a little bit. So talk about that a little bit. What are the new features that are being brought to the table here, and how are they landing for you? Like, are those new features attractive enough that you're happy to have the other stuff paired back in favor of them, or does it feel like a little watered down? I'm interested to hear how they balance those things.
So I think watering down, when I said that before, I realized that was a negative thing. I think the word I would probably use is more of like a streamlining. It's like it's a more concise.
Gotcha.
The whole game is a concise streamlining of the entire Xenoblade gameplay loop. You explore, you're finding items, you're defeating enemies, you meet new characters, you're completing quests, you're opening chests, you're doing all the same things and that you do, but instead of it being there's a lot of that. It's like there is an amount of this in the world, and it specifically has like a checklist. Like in each of these areas, there is, this many bosses to fight. There's this many chests to find. There's this many rare things to find. There's this many locations to find. Blah blah blah. The new system that they've included is the affinity point system. So the way this works is that while you still have leveling up and you still have gems to put on and you still have accessories to wear that sort of buff you and change the way you work and things like that, there's also this affinity point system. So everything you do, so engaging with the world in ways like finding rest points, or completing the collectopedia, defeating like a certain number of each enemy type. So each time you fight an enemy, it will have like an icon above it that says you still need to kill enough of these to complete the collectopedia thing for it. Or there's ones that say you've already done this, so you don't have to waste your time on these enemies if you don't want to. And every time you do that, you are rewarded with a number of these points. And for each character, there's like a section in their character sort of menu where you can go in and spend those points on buffs, new skills, new arts, upgrades to arts. So you can really like go in and tailor your character in let's say that you're playing as the main character's name is Matthew, but I won't go much more into who he is. Playing as Matthew, because that's the sort of the character I've landed on. He's the sort of the protagonist. I quite like his fighting style. He's the fighter. He fights with his fists, and he does like he's very much based on like timing and things like that. But I've also then been able to go in and spend points on if I start a fight from behind and I get the first hit in from behind before the enemy notices me, everyone in the party gets a quick recharge. Whereas other characters where they'll do
Okay.
it and the enemy starts toppled, or and you can spend those points on those characters in the right place wherever they fit in your party.
That's cool. I
Which is
like.
very interesting.
Yeah, that's a smart way of evolving, or I shouldn't even say evolving, but like iterating, I guess, on um, the kind of like juggle system, that like that three has, and I don't know if that's something that existed in the prior ones, but that was something I really enjoyed about the combat of that game. Is like you're managing this team of six, and it's like, okay, like I want to use this character to trigger this, and then we pile this
Yes.
one on top, and that sounds like a cool kind of way to
Yeah.
add to that system.
Yeah, and you can still do all of that. The fun thing about Xenoblade Chronicles 1 that I feel like is underlooked because Shulk is the protagonist and everyone maybe knows him more from Smash before they got into Xenoblade, similar to me, where you want to play as Shulk, but actually there are other characters in that game who are not specifically main characters, but you've got like Melia, who's seems like she's just like a healer and mage user, but you can actually make her very powerful as a character you play as. There's people like Dunban, who, if you set his character up right and you have the right skill sets on, you can never get hit. So you aggro constantly and you never get hit. But because you're always playing as Shulk, you never quite get the feeling of that. And I feel like 3 did a great job of having you very easily be able to just switch through between the 6 characters in your party and play as any of them. Which I think is a great way of doing it. And also, like you say, it's great to, cool, I'm going to break here, swap to the character that I know has topple. Now I toppled so that, I don't have to rely on the computer to do it. But also just like setting up things like in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, you could set up different bursts, like elemental bursts and stuff. Um, so yeah, that's a very handy system that comes into it in the previous games. But yeah, this specifically this affinity point system, it is great to be able to have like, okay, cool, I know that I can, in this situation, I want this character to start combat for this reason. You can sort of swap between them. But because it's what I said about a checklist before. Usually, I'm not the kind of guy that's like a huge fan of checklists.
Sure.
But because the expansion is sort of much smaller than the main game, and I feel like it's going to end up being about 20 hours maybe by the time I'm done with it, the checklist doesn't feel unattainable. It feels like there are things I can't see or can't reach, and there are things I'm still trying to work out. Like there are certain bosses and enemies that only appear in certain weather types, and I'm trying to like, oh, it's raining. Okay, cool. I'll look around and see what's new. Or now it's daytime. I'll see what's around. But that doesn't feel unattainable, and I am actually quite looking forward to, even if I sort of beat the main story, I'm still going to go around the world and tick off things and defeat the enemies and
That's great.
find all the
That's what you
chests and
want.
things like that. Yeah, exactly, and it feels attainable because there's really only been like 3 or 4 areas in this expansion. They've all been sort of quite different, and the enemy types have been different, and they've scaled up as RPGs often do. Um, but going back to previous places, I have a new way of getting around that I can use, and there's things to find in the world and things that pop up later on in the game that you're like, cool, I can go back to this area and see if I can find this, or there's quests that sort of happen there. And yeah, it feels like because it is such a bit of a smaller area, I can just sort of like move around, complete what I want to complete, sort of do what I want to do, and I'm very much enjoying that.
I
That
appreciate
feeling
that
of
it rewards you for that, because I think that's the thing that the game does that the main game does really well is rewarding you for exploration. Is that like
it.
pretty much anywhere you go, there is a thing for you to find or interact with.
Yeah.
And I think kind of almost to its detriment, because there's so much, and it's one of those games that like I think it's tough because it works better for me in a game like Breath of the Wild where the story is more ornamental,
Hmm.
because if you miss a thing, it's it's like you said, right, with Xenoblade 1, right? You put 100 hours in and there's still all this stuff you never did, you never saw, you never touched. And I had a similar feeling when I walked away from Breath of the Wild after I think I put in like 80 or 90 hours, right? And it's like, yeah, like I didn't see every single thing, but I feel like I've gotten my fill, and like I
Yeah.
like the idea that, when I inevitably come back to it, there will be novelty maybe for me to still discover.
Hmm.
But with something like Xenoblade, like because it's so story centric, and like a lot of the stuff that you find is like new story beats or new characters that
Hmm.
like deepen your understanding of the world, or like give you these cool side stories you wouldn't get otherwise, and they unlock new um class types. It's like, oh man, like I kind of
Can't
want to
miss
see
those.
everything,
Yeah.
whereas in this, like it being more bite size, it being more like 20 hours, like I kind of like that. Like I like the idea that, yeah, no, you kind of can see everything because everything is, it's substantial, but it's not
Yeah.
100+ hours
Oh
substantial.
yeah, it does still feel substantial. Like I'm looking at the checklist for areas that I feel like I've sort of gone through, and it's like I've only defeated 50% of the enemies that exist here. I've only done like half of the bosses, or how have I only found like 3 of the ether points? There must be another way for me to tackle this world. There must be a new thing I'm waiting to unlock that lets me go to another place in this world. And some, the areas are unlike some areas of 3 which are very much separate from one another. These are 3 areas that are sort of quite interconnected, and you will move into one and another quite seamlessly, and then you can then go back in at a different angle to a previous area, and you're like, "Oh, I'm here that I could see earlier on the map, or I could see from
Yeah,
afar, but I didn't know how to get there. That's how I get here. I
that's
just
cool.
progress and I come back." So yeah, really really nicely designed world. While we're talking about gameplay, I will say, and we spoke earlier about the combat of some of the games and swapping between them. The combat does feel a little bit more repetitive this time around, just because you don't have that option to swap between things. It does help swapping between the characters because then you'll have it feels more fresh. But if where I've just been playing as Matthew the whole time, very much am starting a battle, break, I'm waiting for someone to topple, then I'm waiting for someone to launch, and then I'm sort of just doing my attacks. But it does help to sort of swap between characters and see what they're about and sort of see what their skills are and just take on a different role. Like, oh, I'm going to focus more on healing, or I'm going to focus more on keeping the aggro rather than just
Yeah.
purely doing damage. So yeah, like it's a mixed bag of like, because there's less variety and there's less choice in what characters you have, all their different classes and their different arts, you only have 6 options instead of like 200 when you add it all together. You're right,
Yeah.
but because you have those 6 options and they still do their own things, you can just swap between them.
It's funny, like how the minutia of that really does make a big difference because I feel like a big part of like the gameplay loop of 3 is being like you're constantly changing who's doing what and then like iterating and being like, oh, like this person's a warrior, but I gave them this healing ability that they can stack, and like you can kind of have that like almost like Final Fantasy tactics, or like, oh, it's almost akin to like breeding Pokemon, right? Or it's like, oh, it's like what combination, or like the Persona system, right? Of like what
Yeah.
combinations do I want to make, and how do I optimize my team to the way I like to fight, or the way I like to
Yes. Yeah.
tackle battles. Um,
And you could even in previous, like in 3, you could have like, oh, I'll just have one main aggro character and I'll just have like 5 fighters and we're just doing pure damage. Or you can go, cool, let's have 3 healers, try and keep us alive. But instead of a defender, we're just being healed. And like you
yeah,
could mix and match how that is. Whereas this one, you very much have 2 fighters, 2 healers, 2 defenders. And it's great because the characters are so strong and they are themselves. They have like a sense of who they are. Whereas in 3, it did feel like at times like you introduced it to the character. I can't remember his name for the life of me. The big guy who's got like the white stripe down his face. I
oh,
can't remember his name.
I can't. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. You
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
keep going.
The big guy. So he's like, at the start of the game, he's got the big sword. He's got like, it's also a shield. He's very much a defender. But then, partway through the game, or most of the game, I've actually got him as another character, and it feels like his personality of, all right, guys, yeah, I'm the big defender. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, come after me. When he's
Noah.
playing like a, no, that's the main character. The
No,
other
wait,
guy.
you're right. You're right. That's the name. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna find it. Yeah, Noah's the skinny boy.
Yeah, yeah, he's the main character.
Um,
Let's see who gets there first. You've had time.
Lance.
Tyon.
It's Lance.
Lance. It is Lance. You're right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tyon's the tactician. So yeah, Lance. His like character, his whole character is, I'm this big brash guy. Come on, then let's fight. And he's got this big shield, and he does the defending, and he takes the damage. When most of the game he's a healer, or he's a sword user or whatever, it doesn't really fit his character. Whereas each of these characters is very much like Matthew has got these sort of like they're almost like wraps, but they're like weapons still.
Yeah, I
And
gotcha.
he's very much like a,
Like
yeah, let's
gauntlets.
fight. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's like, yeah, let's fight. And then you very much got like a healer who's like, okay, I'm gonna heal. And then there's a character who's like, he can't fight. He's made his own weapon that acts as a shield. So he's the defender. And then you have like Shulk very much plays the aggro type, and then you have Rex who brandishes both swords from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and he is he's also a fighter, and like it just makes sense for those characters. And I feel like that is stronger in some ways for who they are and their roles in the team. Um, so yeah, so you might not have as much variety, but it is sort of like tighter and it's more streamlined.
Yeah, and I think there's benefit to that, right? Because it's like I think the Xenoblade being 3 being like a 100+ hour experience, like that experimentation is like part of the loop. Whereas this, it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, I think there's something to be said for finding the strategy and like through limitations, right? Like these are the
Hmm.
pieces I have. How do they play together, right? Is
Hmm.
like, you know, I like the way that you put it, where it's like it's not necessarily shallow. It's just like it's different. It's streamlined. It's like
It's refined. Yeah.
yeah, and it leads to different type of strategizing and a different way of playing. You know, than
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
just having like the totally open situation does.
Yeah. So to finish off some of the new features, there's a couple of new features like before in 3, these characters they become the Ouroboros, they combine into these sort of like Evangelion style like fighting, you know, bodies, I guess.
Monsters, I don't know.
Yeah,
They're like
yeah.
weird. They're like
Like
mechs
weird
but made of
kaiju
flesh.
people. Yeah, 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 yeah. Kind of remind me of I can't remember what they were from Astral Chain, the people things that you summon.
They remind me a lot of I think it's season 4 of Digimon, where
Yeah,
the premise was that the kids would like fuse with the Digimon, and
that was
like
season 4, yeah.
yeah, that was where I stopped watching.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that
I know what you
was
mean.
it.
Yeah,
Reminds
yeah,
me
that's
of
very
that,
much that.
where it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh yeah, it's like it's two people fusing, but instead of turning into like a third stronger person, like you would think, they just turn into like weird monsters.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like, all
yeah.
right,
Whereas
cool.
so in the game explains at the start that like at this point in the story, at this point in sort of the world that we're in, the Ouroboros powers haven't been fully discovered yet. Like they're still, there's only sort of characters sort of vaguely working out what it is, and they've sort of got this power they don't fully understand yet. So instead of like fusing, you just have like powers that you use that are slightly stronger if you combine the two different types of powers, and then you've got characters can then unify and do different attacks together. They're not like fully forming into Ouroboros for like big attacks, but they are like, um, okay, cool. I'm going to do a combo finisher, and it takes this character's ability and this character's effect, and it combines them into one attack. And you can sort of chop and change what character goes with who, and then there's like better synergies, and it sort of tells you this character goes best with these characters. But if you'd rather have this effect, you can mix these two characters instead. And
That's
then
cool.
like
I like that.
yeah, and there's like I think there's like 10 different combinations you can have. I think, which is I don't know. There's 8. Hang on, there's 6 characters, so there's more than 10. But whatever. Um, there must be 9 actually, right? 3 goes with 3 goes with 3. I think so, yeah. But yeah, I mean, yeah. So you have new finisher attacks. There's like a new system for that, and also just like chain attacks are still satisfying as hell, and they have features of that unity in them. So yeah, that's sort of all the new stuff. But it is very much like a new refinement of um the previous thing, previous game.
So I guess the other thing I wanted to ask, because it sounds like on a gameplay level you're in, right? Like you're
Oh
you're
yeah.
enjoying it. You're in the loop, and it it got you back in a good way. And
Oh, I'm
there's
in.
like
Yeah.
fresh stuff to do while you're there. All sounds great. On a story level, how is it resonating with you? Like, are you finding that it's grabbing you the same way that the original did? Like you mentioned, right? That like 3, you really connected with the story. You were able to like really invest in the characters and walk away like, feeling emotional at the end of it, right? Do you think that this, hits on the same level, even though it's, obviously you're spending a lot less time with this cast, right? Like,
Hmm.
are you finding yourself feeling as engaged?
Well, you say that, but a third of the cast are 2 characters I spent 100 hours with
That's
each,
true.
right? I've so let's talk about story in general. I think there's some huge moments in here for Xenoblade fans. If you're like a fan and you've played the previous games and you played 3 like me, expecting because there were so much overlap between the worlds of the 2 game that there was going to be more that delves into that. And really towards the end of it, they didn't really do that. This does it. This does everything you wanted it to do in terms
Okay.
of that. Not that the third was disappointing. It was like an expectation of like, oh, they might do this, and they didn't. They did their own thing with it, which it's its own game. It has its own identity, and you shouldn't just pander to people that played the first 2 games and want that sort of nostalgia and that combination. This does that. There's like a point at the end of chapter 2 of the game, which is only like a couple of hours in, but it's like one of the best fights of the entire series. Like this huge boss fight. These characters come back. Like I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and like there's moments that I was like, oh wow, and then like immediately after that, you go into a new area, and I was like, oh, this music's really familiar, and then I realized that it's like a from an earlier game, and then I look at the enemy I'm fighting because I just sort of like clicked and started attacking, and I was like, that's like an enemy from the previous game. Then I was like, oh, hang on a minute, am I about to? And you sort of walk around the corner and you're greeted with something very familiar, and I was like, oh my god, like this is what I wanted. And there are plenty of moments in the game where like you have these things called like affinity talks, something like that, where two characters or three characters will have a conversation about something they've seen, and you'll sort of stand, and there'll just be like shots of the landscape, and then there'll be some dialogue. And a lot of the characters, some of the characters will say, "Oh, it'll be like I remember this from XYZ, an event during their
I
game." And there's just
remember
lots
this
of
from Xenoblade 1.
yeah. Like there's a lot of moments that are like, oh. There's one, for example. Actually, no, I won't spoil anything. Actually, but like there are things that you're like, oh, this feels familiar, and then the character will say, oh, I did this one on there, and you're like, that's a moment from the game that I remember being a significant moment, and the developers knew it was a significant moment, and they've sort of factored it in, and it's just nice, right? It is um, a lot of it feels like fan service, but it feels like it's fan service that's it's not just for fan service's sake. It's got heart and it's got weight. The returning characters, they're not just like cameos they've sort of sprinkled in for nostalgia bait. Whereas like in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, you could unlock Shulk as a playable character, or he was like a blade and he would like be with you. That feels like a cameo sprinkled in for no reason. These characters that you're seeing now, they've lived their lives. They've had their fights from before. They're battle weary. They're they've had 30 years of actually living and having their own struggles, and they know they know this world because it's the world they lived in already, and it's just really like well done, I think. I won't elaborate much more on
Yeah,
the characters
I don't
how
want
they
to,
fit in.
take those moments away from anybody who may
Yeah,
not have gotten
absolutely.
to it yet.
But these are
Obviously,
just things that are in.
but
Sorry, go on.
I'm glad to hear that's the takeaway, because it, like, based on what you've told me, it feels like that's kind of where you want it to sit, right? Like
Mhm.
you want this to feel like kind of a celebration of everything that's come before, and a capstone
Yes.
to this trilogy, and
Yeah.
something that is for the fans, right? And I think we talk about fan service, right? And I think it's one of those things where I think of fan service the same way I think of nostalgia, right? Where it's like, eh, like it's not inherently good or bad; it's how it's done,
Mhm.
right? And it's
Yeah.
like there are moments where you have like what you've described, where there's like the cameo type stuff that like maybe is hollow emotionally, but you're like, that's cool or whatever, right? Like that's fine,
Mhm.
I whatever. That's a nice nod. Um, it's cool that it feels like it goes a little beyond that, though, right? Like
Yeah, I
that
think if
it wants to play on, it wants to build on the fact that you have an emotional attachment to those characters, to
exactly.
not only be like, hey, remember this, but also to be like, okay, cool, but like let's do something with that. Let's take that
Yeah.
goodwill and that love that you have and make you feel something, you know?
Yeah, I think if it was like you're playing in this world and you're walking around and then a portal opens and uh in through sorry, in walks Shulk and he goes, "Hi, I'm Shulk," and he goes, "Oh, I'm Rex," or whatever, and they go, "Time to let's fight bad guys together." Right? I very much felt that with Spider-Man: No Way Home. I know that might be controversial. The film didn't really land for me properly because while it was cool that these Spider-Men were coming together, I did very much feel like a portal opened, Tobey Maguire walks through it, and he's like, "Let's go and solve the bad guys." I know that that character is the main character, and that I'm not the main character of this. I know that I'm a side character in this, so let's go and assist the main character. Like, and it just felt a bit odd for me. And I'm glad that this didn't do that. I'm glad that they're like, you know, you meet them and they're like, "Oh yeah, I've lived through that, and it's now 30 years later, and I've had kids, and I've lost, and I've struggled, and now I'm still trying to do what's right, basically." However, before we move on from the story, or maybe move on from this entirely, I am a little bit worried that by the end of this expansion, there's not going to be like any elaboration on the end of the main game of like the main story, because that was heartbreaking. Like the end of that story was like really heartbreaking. And when I knew there was expansion coming, even though we knew that there was this cast of characters, the first Ouroboros that founded the city, even though we knew that that was coming and that was going to happen, part of me still hoped that they would actually pick up from where the game left off, and that we would sort of see what happens to the characters of three afterwards. And it'd be a shame to leave that completely hanging. I do hope there is like a moment where they're like, cool, and now we go into the fact that it's called Future Redeemed. I hope that they go, cool, now that you've seen how it got there, here's a little chunk at the end, and we see that everything worked out the way you wanted it to, or things happen the way they did. Because yeah, at the end of 3, I was like, the reason I was crying is because I was like, this isn't finished for me. Um, Not like, oh, the writers have, because they very intentionally ended it in that way. They very
Yeah,
intentionally wanted
yeah,
that to be the ending for it. But I was like, this is tragic. Like, this is what's happening here. Even though it's sort of a net positive, I was like, this is tragic, and I want this to go a certain way. And yeah, it would be a shame if we get to the end of this and this not there. But I feel like that's also me being a little bit selfish of being like, cater to me and what I want, not this sort of like
right.
what we've said before is like a bow on the franchise and sort of like a culmination of everything the trilogy has done and achieved. And I feel like in playing this and seeing how they've taken like a lot of the old stuff and they're doing like best of stuff and they're like, oh, here's returning features from the previous games that work in different ways. Oh, it's very much streamlined in such a way that if Monolith Soft didn't do Xenoblade again, they moved on to something else, I wouldn't be surprised because this feels like they've done 3 games. Here's the piece that links them all together that people have been waiting for. Moving on to something else now. That would be okay for me.
I'm very interested in that. Like as a concept, is like what like where do things go from here? Um, just because I don't know. So like I have an article here from Tech Radar where they're talking about the title of it is, and this is by Rice Wood or Reese Wood. Is probably it's probably Reese.
Spell it.
Sorry,
Spell it.
Rhys.
Reese. That's Reese.
Reese.
Welsh.
So well, and I'll throw a link down to this if you want to check it out for yourself. Go give Reese a click. There the title of it is Nintendo alludes to Xenoblade Chronicles 4, but we're not convinced, and it talks about kind of a little of like how it's been talked about, right? And what we've got here, right, is the producer of 3, Genki Yokota, right, said that there was an Ask the Developer interview on Nintendo's website, and responding to the question of whether or not it will continue, he says, yes, it will still go on. I want to keep it going as long as possible, which I thought was pretty interesting. But then let me see, there's been some context here of like just like why there's doubt in it, because I think there's been another. I'm trying to find the actual thing because there was a situation where I believe. Yeah, here we go. The context was that when he had talked about it before, right? There had been language about 3 wanting to tie everything together and kind of like bring the story in, and obviously like we've talked about how that is one of the things going on in the DLC here, and it's like, is the idea of 3 being the end of this story, like is that something that makes sense, and then maybe we move forward with something like a start of a second trilogy that still has some connective tissue but isn't direct continuation in the way that this is. It's so interesting because it feels like, based on, again, my very limited knowledge from how you've talked about it, right, and how other folks have talked to me about it, I get the sense that you can kind of do whatever, right? Because like every story is connected, but the ways in which they're connected are like malleable, right? So it's like you could easily kind of have a fresh, clean slate and start something new and have it be like maybe akin to a Final Fantasy, right? Where there's iconography and style and tone that carries across.
Funny you say that, because that's what I thought Xenoblade. That's what everyone thought Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was. We had Xenoblade Chronicles, then we had X, very different in some ways, but still had some of the core stuff. Xenoblade Chronicles 2, completely different story, completely different characters, completely different world, completely different like setup. Like it had a lot of the same motifs. It had like giant things you're walking on, and it had like a similar sort of combat. It had a red sword, the same way that 2 also had like
the little
a lot of
fluffy
that stuff.
guys.
The Nopon, yeah.
Yeah.
And then that turned out to be like almost a bait and switch, where they're sort of, it looked like they were doing a Final Fantasy thing, but actually no, this is sort of like part of a larger narrative. And then 3, I think the very first trailer for 3, I remember thinking, oh, they're doing it again. They're sort of doing like a separate thing, and then right at the very end of the trailer, you go, oh, like I see what they've done here with this final shot, where they've very much said like, no, this is still related. And I wonder if this does tie everything up and they do a 4, if people are gonna just expect another bait and switch. They're gonna wait, they're gonna be expecting if they do a 4 and it is a completely different thing, they're like, "Alright, okay, how does this tie in? Like, where does the characters that bridge it, where are they and how have they involved in this in some way?" So I wonder if yeah, I wonder if now that they've done this, and I think they did it very cleverly with 2, and I think that they've done a nice way of going like, here's a game, another separate game, ha ha ha, not really, you're fucked. Here's 3 to prove it and bring it all together, and here's this expansion to try it all together. If they, they should they need to move on and do something else because they can't get away with it again, right? Or can they? Who fucking
I-
knows? It's
and who's to say? I think it's like it's one of those things where it's like you could easily introduce a fourth mythology that fits into this somehow. You could easily be like, right, that trilogy's over. We're starting something fresh, and it's gonna be connected because that's how we did
yeah,
it. But it'll be different,
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
or like they do something else, which like I almost feel like that would be better. Like I
Yeah.
don't have any I don't mean this with any disrespect to Xenoblade as a franchise. I think it's it's got its fans. It's been a successful trilogy, but like Monolith Soft is like such a polished studio, and like they're able to like put out stuff at just such high quality. I would
Mhm.
love to see them try something new that has less baggage attached to it,
Yeah.
because it's the whole thing, to put a pin on this, like, oh, you should play it, the story is great. Do I have 300 hours to play these? And then when the first game is like, well, over a decade old now, right? It's
Yeah,
like it
yeah.
would be great to see them be like, hey, from the makers of Xenoblade, like, here's
Yeah.
a new franchise, a new IP that you can, you as somebody who's like, maybe been interested in Xenoblade, or kind of like longingly been, oh, I wish I was a fan, I wish I had gotten in on the ground floor. That that could be cool, like, and it could even be like, a spiritual successor, but like just have a new name and a new style, and be like, this is a
Mhm.
new thing, and this is
Well,
a fresh jumping on point for anybody.
let me take you back to August 23rd, sorry, 21st, 2017. Um, Pixel Par, we know Pixel Par, right?
Friend of the show.
The friend of the show, brought us together with Loot Pots. This is about a year before we both started working with him. And he pointed out that the Australian, no, sorry, the studio had started recruiting for experienced developers to work on the new ambitious project that looks to differentiate itself from what has come to be expected about the games they've previously created. There was like concept art. It was sort of more of like a medieval looking thing with like dragons and normal armor and sort of. There's still a red sword, but it very much seemed like a fantasy action RPG kind of thing. Where's that? That was 2017. They were hiring what 6 years ago now. Let's say they had a team working on Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and 3, and maybe this other team's been working on this Switch exclusive fantasy game that we might still see. It might come out in a few years' time. It might be called something else. Maybe they keep the Zeno about it, but it's um, not Xenoblade, or
Xeno
it's they keep the
Shield,
blade of it. Yeah, yeah. They keep the
or the
blade of it, or
blade, yeah, right, whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, that would be cool. I think that would be, to me, that would be a more exciting next step for them as a studio than,
mhm.
hey, let's do Xenoblade 4, which I
Yeah,
think is like not a bad idea, but it just feels like a safe idea. It's like, yeah, okay, we're done with that one. Let's make the next one. It's like,
yeah,
I'd love to see you guys take the learnings that you've had and like try something else. And then, like, even if you come back to it after that, right? Like,
yeah,
that's cool. Like, give me Xenoblade 4 on the next piece of hardware, like 6-7 years from now or whatever, right?
yeah. Like
After we've
try
already
something
gotten
new.
something else.
Yeah, I've just forwarded you the in Discord the concept art of this game they were hiring for 6 years ago, or whatever.
Right, yeah, so I've got them pulled up for folks over on YouTube if you want to check them out. Very interesting. Like you said, very like much more like kind of traditional swords and sorcery kind of fantasy
Yeah,
vibe. A lot less like science fictiony, I would
proper
say.
knights in proper armor with proper swords and scabbards
There's a
and like
dragon, like
yeah,
all
yeah.
kinds of stuff.
Now, of course, this is just because loads of things this could be. This could just be concept art for a game that never got off the ground. It could be something that was cancelled. It could have been something
Sure.
they were like, okay, cool, let's do something, and it ended up being Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Or it could be that they're doing sort of Xenoblade Chronicles X, where they go off and they do Xenoblade Chronicles Y. I don't know, and it's a medieval spin-off that takes a lot of the same cues and is a very much the same sort of thing. But instead of being sci-fi, it's more traditional fantasy. But hey, it's been 6 years now that 3 in this expansion are out. We can only really be a few years away from what they're working on next. I feel like we're always getting new stuff from Monolith. You know, we had 2 was 2017. Sorry, X was 2015. 2 was 2017. The remake of 1 was 2019, and then 2022 for sorry, 2020 was the remake of 1. Sorry, and then
3 in 2022.
3 2022, and then this expansion. 2018 was the DLC for the second game, right? So it's sort of like once every 2 years, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, or once they finished a project, so 2 in the DLC. 2 years after that, 1 came out. 2 years after that, 3 came out, and then there's this. So it could even be a couple of years, only a couple of years till we go, here's this game, and it's ready.
I wonder what their size is, because like obviously they also worked on Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom in that time. So like they've got to be a pretty large studio to be able to like juggle that many projects effectively.
I think so. How many? There's 4 studios.
Wow! Oh my gosh!
As of 2020, that is a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
Number of employees: 264 employees as of 2022.
That's not that many for 4 studios, actually.
Yeah.
But so that
well, maybe a couple of those studios are just the ones that like have helped out on Breath of the Wild. I'm sure that's just like not a huge team, but
yeah,
it's just,
right. I was gonna say maybe like one of those is the support, one of them is the Xenoblade team, one of them's the new IP team, you know, and one of them's like general support for like other Nintendo games or whatever, you know.
Also they worked on the Baten Kaitos 1 and 2 HD remaster that's coming to the Switch this year.
They stay busy. They really stay busy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. You know, I think whatever they do next, I think Xenoblade Chronicles 3 definitely raised their profile a little bit. It feels like similar to like, I think kind of like what Fire Emblem Awakening did for Fire Emblem. It feels like it raised that profile a little bit. So you got to imagine whatever they do next, there's going to be more attention on it than there had been.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so let's we'll move off the Xenoblade conversation for a bit. We're going to keep the DLC conversation rolling here in just a second, but before that, let me remind you that this episode of Nintendo Noise is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of April. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valens, Earth Visitor, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, a.k.a. Sobi, Snackago, Ty the Dude, and Waka Hula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. You're all the realest of the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. If you want to go and show your support just like they did, you can head over to patreon.com/flipscreengames, where you can get a whole bunch of perks and goodies, including getting the show early, getting your thoughts right on the air, all that good stuff. But, of course, if you don't have any money for us, there's a bunch of ways you can get involved that will not cost you a pretty penny. Head over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you can join our Discord right into the show for the question block, just like a bunch of folks did this week. Or, you know, however else you want to get involved. We got links to a bunch of places you can find us all over the web. However you choose to get involved and show your support, we thank you for being a member of the Flip Screen Games community.
Is that the longest episode start to housekeeping section break we've had for a long time?
On this show, I want to say maybe. Yeah, I don't know ever, like, across our other show, we've definitely, like, we did a show not that long ago where I did the intro, like, 40, 50 minutes into the show. Like that. Or the, not intro, but you know what I mean, the housekeeping.
Yeah.
I think the last one that you and I did, we got pretty deep in before we got to it, so it happens.
Yeah.
On Nintendo Noise, I don't know. The opening segment, usually not that long. But yeah, here's the thing. I was like, it's a review in progress, and then you come at me and you're like, I've got like 2 hours left in this game. So we had a lot to talk about, you know?
Well, no, I actually do think that when I think this, if I just focus on the story now, I reckon I'll be done within 2 hours. But I think with everything else that's going on, I know we said we were going to move on. I do think I'm going to hit around 20 hours by the time I get to the end of it.
Well, to make sure we don't talk about it for 20 hours, I'm going to cut you off and I'm going to move us along here. So I wanted to use this game as a jumping off point to start a conversation with you that's been kind of like brewing in the back of my head for a bit. What is up with Nintendo's DLC strategy, Max? Because
yeah, this is a big question.
Here's what I'll say. I think that most folks would agree that the DLC that Nintendo makes is mostly high quality, right? Like looking at you, Splatoon 3, that was obviously not great. But
Yeah,
by
there
and
have been a few
large,
ones like the ones where it's like they have a trend of doing like smaller bits of DLC and then like an expansion, right? And generally, whenever I go back to a game and I play those expansions, I'm like, that was good, that was a good time.
sure.
I'm really struggling to think of some examples off the top of my head, but I definitely had a chunk a few years ago where I was like, oh yeah, I didn't play that DLC, I'll get that, and every time I've been like, that was great, that was worth my time and worth my money. Whereas I can't say that for a lot of like, if I buy the Game of the Year edition of like a PS3 game and it's like cost me £5. PS4 game, I should say. I generally won't always do the DLC because I'm like, I've had my time with it, but that could also just be a timing thing.
Sure. And everybody's relationship with DLC is going to be different, right? And I know it's tougher to come back for a big expansion than it is for like small DLC for a multiplayer thing or something like that, or DLC for a game you're already playing, whatever. So I don't want to take them to task for that side of things, right? But I think what I find a bit confounding is the kind of lack of rhyme or reason to how they handle DLC. And I think the thing that specifically it makes it so glaring in my mind is the existence of the expansion pack, right?
Yeah, I think me and Steve have spoke about this on the past where I think it was the Mario Kart 8, when they were talking about one of the most recent Mario Kart 8 DLC packs. We had a conversation about why is this not in the expansion pack? No, it is. Wait,
It is.
That one is. That one is.
That
There's
one
another
is.
one that is.
But
Well, yeah, here we go. That's the point. It's not. There's no rhyme or reason.
exactly. The fact that you don't know speaks to what I'm talking about. This game, for example, is not, right? The Fire Emblem Engage Season Pass was not as a part of that, right? And last week on the show, we had friend of the show, Chris Brandrick from Switch Weekly on to talk about State of Switch Survey. And, we were going over the data about the expansion pack, right? And, I don't want to get too into the weeds because we did that all last week. You can go listen to that conversation if you haven't already. But in that, we talked about how, a lot of Nintendo's most hardcore audience not super satisfied with the expansion pack, right? From Chris's data, 51.65% of Switch Online members shared that they had not signed up for the expansion pack tier. And of those that did, right, of those people surveyed, 75% of members said that the basic Switch Online membership did offer a good value for the money, whereas only 40% of expansion pack members felt that it had a good value for the money. And, I think I can't say that I blame them, because I think even if you think it is a good value, it's really hard to look at it as a sound investment the same way that I look at Xbox Game Pass or even PlayStation Plus. Because I know what I'm going to get. Even if I don't like the games that they give me every month on PS Plus, I feel pretty confident that at least one game in the whole year will be good enough, or a few small games will be good enough that I'll have made my money back. I don't have that confidence. And obviously Game Pass, great deal. We don't even have to talk about that. But I don't feel that confidence necessarily with Nintendo because I don't know when games are coming. I don't know what games are coming to the NSO apps. I don't know what expansion packs are going to be included, and it's like,
it feels entirely
why?
random. And we've seen before, I think so, the first year the Switch came out and they did Switch Online, they went, okay, here's NES games. And then they go, okay, cool, here's SNES games. No, hang on, how did it work? What was first? Yeah,
NES,
it was NES
you're
games
right. It's NES,
for a
then
while.
it was
Then it was
SNES.
SNES. And then they go, cool, here's
N64 Genesis.
games, but you have to pay more. But the thing is, when the games first come out, they go, cool, here's like the first 10 games. We're going to release games regularly. And they'll do like two or three launches of the games that and then it's just like a trickle maybe of games that you have possibly heard of, or games that have never released in the UK. It's only ever been like in Japan. Oh, it's the first time this game you've not heard of comes out. And, like, that's cool for like the hardcore who maybe did play that game and imported it from Japan, but for us who don't care about that, and there are still big bangers that maybe aren't on the for the N64. I don't really know any because I'm not a big N64 guy. But I feel a little bit like,
I mean, like, that's the thing. There's a lot, right? Like, when you're looking at like they just launched the Game Boy stuff, right? There's no Pokemon. What's up with that, right?
Yeah.
On N64, right? There's like, where's I don't think it's come yet. Banjo-Tooie, right? Where's Diddy Kong Racing? Where's there's plenty of these games that are like, these are the games we want. And I think if they can't tell me, hey, there's going to be one new game on this service every month, or there's going to be, 4 new games on it a year or something like that. If they can't give me a cadence, why the fuck am I waiting? Just put them all out. Just give me everything you're going to give me, and then let's move on. Because I'm not excited about the new releases when they come, because they just come out of nowhere. I can't plan around it in the way that I want to. And it's like, to take it back to this game, right? Like, why the hell is the season pass for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 or like Fire Emblem Engage, which are like way more niche titles, not a part of the expansion pack?
Yeah.
I would be way more likely to engage with that content if it was in the expansion pack that I'm paying for. Whereas
I've got the converse thing where I'd be way more likely to engage in the expansion pack if that stuff was included. Like, if they call it the expansion pack, and they have put some expansion things in there, and even before launch they've said, hey, if you're in the expansion pack, you get this game of like Animal Crossing or the Mario Kart 8 one, which I was wrong about earlier. If they said that by buying this expansion pack you get access to expansion passes, you
every piece
always
of
get
DLC.
Access to, yeah, and I think that's a much better sell. And granted, that might sound like a too good of a value maybe, but you've also then got to realize you've then got to spend £60 on games that don't go down in price, or sorry, $60 on games that rarely go down in price, like Fire Emblem Engage, like Xenoblade Chronicles 3. If you got the expansion pack and you were like, oh, I see I've got the expansion for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 in here, I'll go and pick up the game, you're still giving Nintendo $60 there to access that. It's not like you're getting the game for free and you're also getting the expansion for free, or you're getting the game on like PS Plus, so you're picking up for like £3.
I'm also paying the yearly rate for it, right? Like, it's like, that's the whole game of services, right? Is like, you're supposed to give me enough value that I keep the subscription up, and like, I get that they want to offer the least amount of value that they can so they can maximize their return, but it's like, I mean, charge more for it then. Like, if it cost more and I knew it was going to give me everything, I would pay that, because like, that's what I want, is the perception of value. And I'm not surprised that a lot of people, and I have had the expansion pack the entire time it's existed.
Have you?
Yeah.
Have you engaged with the N64 content at all?
A good amount. Like, when it first came out, I was playing it a lot, and it's like, now I probably don't need it anymore, but it's also like, I have a family plan with, my wife, and it's like, it doesn't cost me any more than it would if I was a single person with the regular one. So it's like, whatever. Like, it's negligible. It's the same reason that, like, and you and Steve are both good about this, like, I just pay for PS Plus every year, and I just pay for Game Pass, because it's like, I'm not going to cancel it and then it's like, I'm lazy. I am. And when it comes to a subscription, like, I just want to have it on and have it be valuable enough that I don't even think about canceling it.
Yeah.
That's the model. That's how that model makes money.
I will buy a year of PS Plus up front, and I'll just live with that for the year. Then when it comes to upgrade time, generally around Black Friday, I'll do it again. That's been my go-to, because I know that every month I get new games. With Game Pass, I don't know if I'm going to want it for a full year, and it doesn't save me any money, or it doesn't, like, I don't miss out on anything by just picking it up for a cheap 1 month.
Turn it back on.
Yeah, for a cheap 1 month, when there is something I want to play on it, because it's not like I'm missing out on free games that I have to claim and hold on to, blah blah blah. So while with Nintendo, I don't even pay for the basic one. I mean, I'm on a family plan. So it's not even like I'm generally paying into that too much. But PlayStation, is different. But Games Pass, I have no need to commit to it for that period of time, because while it is cool that things are coming up, it is something that is like, oh, that's a bonus to me, not like, this is how I play games. I wait for them to come out on Game Pass, or I play them on Games Pass, or anything like that.
Yeah, I get you. And it's just like, when I think about this, I think if they were to do it that way, it would be such an incentive for people to go back to games that they didn't finish. Because, like, I didn't finish Fire Emblem Engage earlier this year. I have plans to get back to it and finish it. But I just kind of took a break, right? Because it's like, I don't really care about the story, and I'm not going to forget how to play Fire Emblem, right? Like, it's not that kind of game. Yeah. So I can jump into it whenever. But if I knew, like, oh, hey, like, the DLC came out and it's free on the expand, I'd be like, oh, shit, like, let me jump back in. Like, let me go finish this game that I paid for, And then I would have the perception of, oh, look at this value that I got out of this. This is incredible. Let me re-up, Whereas, like, I did have the thought, like, when I got laid off earlier this year, like, I did think, like, I should probably cancel these, right? Like, You know, like, am I really playing Nintendo games online? No.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, like, and like, I have a Steam Deck. Do I really need to play the NSO apps? No.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I don't.
But you still have it though, right?
I do. Yeah, because I paid for it for the year, right? But it's like,
Ah, yeah, right. Good
when
point.
it comes to September and it's time to re-up, I mean, will I re-up this year? I don't know. Like, I'm using it the least I've ever used it. So it's like,
Which is weird because you should, in theory, obviously other things notwithstanding, you should have more time to play these games, right? I
you
know
would
that obviously
think.
that's not actually been the case for you, but yeah, you would feel like now is the time to have something like that. I know someone who said they were only gonna they bought like a year of the PS Plus Ultimate, whatever, and they were like, I said that's a lot of money for something that you don't know if you're going to use. And they're like, no, because what that means is I don't have to buy games anymore. That's like my main source of games, and I've since then they've not used it, and I've said like you paid for the year. And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, how's it going? How are you getting on playing that game?" And they're like, "Oh, blah, 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 blah." And it's like, "Well, yeah, but you didn't know. Like, you thought this would save you money, and that's what they want you to think, that
Right.
you just need to buy that once, and your money is,
You're
you know,
set.
then you're set for the whole year." But actually, things change. Games come out. Games are announced. You don't know what the plan is. So
You're better off
you
having
got
that flexibility in your budget. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Unless you can afford to set it and forget it, right? But
yeah, yeah. Which for this person, it specifically was, I am too poor to be able to buy a load of new games, so I'm going to buy this one subscription, means I don't have to, but has then just bought new games all year anyway.
yeah,
Um,
right, exactly. Yeah. Whereas, like, I think with Game Pass, you kind of can get away with that, right? Where it's
yeah,
like,
I think that's a better
I think
sell.
there are like, if you're the type of person who doesn't need to be playing new games, you could have a Game Pass subscription and never pay for another video game.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
I
like,
agree. But
easily.
I think if you were someone who wasn't like a hardcore Nintendo gamer, or you're not regularly playing games online, you said to me, "Is the Switch Online worth it for the games that are in there?" I would say absolutely not. There's no
No.
way it's worth paying fifty
Well,
pounds a year for N64
I
games.
think
And
for the base, I think it is. I think the $20 is not bad. Like, $20 a
but
year is it's such a small amount of money that, like, if you
yeah,
play any games online and then you also have the NES, Super Nintendo, Game Boy, and I think that's it that you get for base level.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
not bad. Like, that's I
See,
think
but
that's a pretty good value, actually, especially when you think about the fact that you also get stuff like Tetris 99, which is really good, and some
yeah,
of those other games. Like, I think the
I think
$20 a year is like swallowable, but like the
yeah, but I said
expansion
that that's
pack,
the
you're not
point,
getting
right?
enough to
I
warrant
think
it.
that swallowable, like, oh, is it worth it? Well, yeah, like if you want to play games online, you have to have it, and it's only 20 quid. So like, yeah, it's swallowable, but is it like if I need this service? It's like, well, you do need it if you want to play games online, but if you don't want to play games online and you're just like, should I get it to play the games that are on it? I would say no every time. But like for me, if I did not know if I ever wanted to just play a game of Fortnite, um, pick up Mario Kart. Also, if I wasn't already part of a family plan, I wouldn't get it because I so rarely touch it. Very, very much the same way that I'm with Game Pass. Like I'm like, oh, I'll pick it up, whenever it is. But because it's such a negligible amount of money and it is so small and it's for the whole year, I just don't notice it. Whereas I would with the expansion pass, I would look at that $50 and go, that's a bit much. I'm going to cancel that because I'm going to feel that. I feel that more than I feel the $20
Yeah.
that the other one
And
costs.
I think for me, like, the reason I don't think about it that way is because I have the family plan. Like, the amount it increased it's like $30 instead of 20. So it's like, okay, whatever. Like, that's not that big a deal, right?
Yeah.
When you split it up between the people on my plan. But it's also like, I'm like, I think I'll probably bump back down next year
hmm
unless there is like some really significant additions. Because, like, I don't know, like, I I I don't I don't know. I think the value is really dependent on how much you want to play retro games. And, like,
Yeah.
I am definitely the odd man out on this podcast of being like, I think that a lot of the folks like on our panels are very much like, oh, old game is old, whatever. I don't want to play NES games. And it's just like, I don't agree with that. You know, like, I think a lot of old games are fantastic, and like,
Yeah.
I've gotten a lot of pleasure out of being like, oh, cool, like, since I through NSO, right? Like, I've rebeaten games like rebeat every Super Mario Brothers game. I replayed Sonic 2. I replayed, I got through Punch Out, right? Like, stuff like that. And like, I fuck with those games. They're really fun. And like, it for $20, yeah, cool. Like it's a good
Yeah.
library, but it's also
I
like
disagree that
it's
I would say old game is old. Like I'm a big retro guy, and I've always sort of like a lot of the games that I love, things like Shovel Knight and Mega Man games, things like that, are things that are inspired by older games, and in many ways are older games like Mega Man 2 and all those sort of things.
sure.
I was very much a retro gamer years ago. I got into Metroid, Super Metroid, and all that through that, and but I still don't see the value in that because I'm very much of the opinion that a game that old, like, just emulate it. I know that this is like the only way they're giving it to you in like a legal format, but I also feel like just emulate it. Like who is it hurting at this point? It's not a new game. It's not a brand new game that's come out. And I know this is probably not the opinion everyone's going to agree with, but I feel like at a certain point you have to go, who does it actually hurt? Is it hurting Nintendo me right now playing this 20-year-old game
I
illegally,
think that's like a
on an
different
emulator?
thing though, because it's like, I don't disagree with you. I make no bones about the fact that I don't have a problem with emulation. I think
Mhm.
emulation is really important for video game preservation, and there are a lot of games that Nintendo refuses, and I shouldn't even just say Nintendo, but publishers, right, refuse to make available. And in that case, right, like I don't think there's any ethical qualms about emulation. I think where that gets tougher for me is like, oh, like this game's old, so you should just get it for free. Is like, not if it's made commercially available and there's a modern version of it that's good, you should pay for it. Is my take on that, But also like, where's the line on that? Because
Mm.
like I've bought Super Mario World what 3-4 times. Like I don't feel like I need to buy that game again, right?
Yeah.
I could pirate Pokemon Blue 30, 40, 50 times and they'd still have gotten their money's worth from me, right? On that
Yeah.
one. So it's like I think that line is not super clear, but I also think that there are a huge number of people that don't want to do that, right? And it's like
Mhm.
we talk about this on the Steam Deck podcast where it's like you and I have Steam Decks and we know how to do emulation and like are not scared by the process associated with that. Where like I think the average person doesn't really want to deal with that. They want to just go
Yeah.
on Virtual Console and be like, "Oh, Super Mario World is $5. Cool, here's $5. Give me my game." That's what they want, right? Or
Yeah.
through the NSO app. I think the average person, right? Like, or again, if you don't have a PC, right, where you're like actively playing games on it, or like getting into homebrew or whatever, like, are you gonna go through the trouble of emulating games? Are you gonna set up an N64 emulator on your laptop and then buy a controller and sync it up and map it? And it's like, you're probably not going to do that. Whereas like
Yeah.
there are a lot of people that will buy a proprietary controller from Nintendo and then play it on their service. So like I don't disagree with you in terms of like that's probably the way I would engage with games like that. But like I think there are a lot of consumers for like with which they just don't even want to engage with that kind of in that way at all, right? Like that's not what they do. They're not tinkerers or like they're not interested in figuring out how to get things to run, right? They want to sit down and play an old game, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I think in that scenario, like it's the onus is on Nintendo to offer it in a way that's palatable for users and that they're comfortable with the profit margin, right? And like I can't understand why NSO is how they've decided to do that. I don't think any of the apps are as robust as they should be. And like
Yeah.
when you compare what retro games are available on the Switch compared to the Wii, right? It's like it sucks.
Yeah.
It's
Massively.
not
Yeah. Game.
comparable at all.
The Virtual
So
Console is how I was introduced to so many franchises and so many games, and how I was, I most of the games I bought on Wii were Virtual Console games, and it was a
yeah.
time where I didn't have a lot of money, and so it was cheaper that way. And eventually, I sort of found my way into emulation. I had like emulators on my on USB sticks that I would take to school with me, and I would just like plug them into the library computers and just
Yeah.
sort of play games that way. Um,
I got really
but
into it on like my PSP and my
yeah,
first
same.
smartphone and yeah, for
Yeah,
sure, man. And that's the thing is like it's a shame that that is such a more viable option in many cases than just engaging with the systems that Nintendo themselves have made,
yeah,
It should be that simple. And yeah, I mean, it's a bummer. Like, I look at the expansion pack and like it just feels like a missed opportunity. And
Yeah, I agree.
for it to only have DLC from like the most popular games, like feels like backward to me too. Because it's like I would rather pay for like a Mario Kart 8 expansion than the Fire Emblem Engage expansion I don't know that I'm going to get to, or the season pass for, you know, a single player story game that I stopped playing in June of last year, right? Like,
Yeah. Or they go on and they go, I know you're excited for Splatoon 3, so here's the Splatoon 2 expansion. You're like, okay, cool, but like I'm not playing that one. And it's odd that you decided to choose that over a game that is new and coming out now, that has expansion, that has DLC coming out when I've paid for this expansion pass now. You know, you've added this. Only the most hardcore of hardcore people are gonna want to pay. I mean, we know that it's only like less than 50% that have upgraded to the new tier. How many of those people that already own Splatoon 2 haven't already bought a Splatoon 2 season pass because they wanted to play that? It just seems like an odd cop out, really.
yeah. It's like when you look at Happy Home Designer being like the first thing that they launched with it, you're like, oh, this is great. This is a great value, actually. And then it's like, damn, but they took their foot off the gas. And I just feel like it's not serving the users well, and I don't think it's serving the DLC well. Because it's like, I wonder what the sales are like on DLC for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and Fire Emblem Engage, you know? If they needed to make the expansion pack, you know, a little bit more expensive per year to guarantee you'd get everything, it's like, I think you'd be better off, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it is a huge shame. There's, you know, it's a reason that while I very much support Nintendo, and I am, even when people last year were saying like, oh, the Switch didn't do a lot for me, and I was like, no, I think every year there people say that about the Switch. I go, well, hang on, don't forget you also have this, this, and this, and this. And I think every year there's been reasons to keep playing the Switch. I'm a big supporter of them. I've never supported their decision with the expansion pass, and it's been very difficult year on year to justify to other people why the paid online works. You know, when it was first announced, it was like, oh yeah, look, you have these games, you'll have access to like special deals and things like that. None of that's really come through.
It's just
You know,
stopped.
the app,
Like, it's like
yeah.
they made they're like, here, you get Tetris 99. And that's the thing is, like, I remember arguing at multiple points that they were a good value. And it's like, I think at this point, it's like, you just there needs to be more stuff. You need to put more things on it. You can't just be like, yeah, here, it's this $150 DLC from 3 years ago. Is that anything? No, it's not. Not anymore. You know, like, and I just don't think the value's there. But I think even less than the value, it's just like, I would love to see them use this to encourage people to spend more time with their games and more time on Switch, and like to get into the DLC that these teams spend all this time working on. And it's like, do even half the people that bought the game play it? No, probably not. And it's like, I bet you could increase that a lot and train people to be excited about DLC. But, you know, we'll see, right? Like, it's something that I think at this point it's not going to change. Really, it's like
No, I think
whatever
it's too late.
Whatever the successor is going to be where we get another shot at that. So
Yeah,
we'll
but
see.
even then, they might just carry on the same system. You never know.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Max, good show today. Good work.
Yeah.
Despite all the technical problems, we overcame everybody. We made it through.
We have, I mean, I feel like we've been sat here for a while trying to get this going. At least like an hour, maybe even 2 hours. Actually, we've been.
It's about 2 hours to get a
one.
1 hour show done. But hey,
you
know, we persevere, we press on, we do the best we can, and you, the listener, support us either way. So of course we are very appreciative of y'all.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in.
Can I have one final
do it.
say on this is back to Xenoblade. One final say.
This fucking guy. I let him talk for 45 minutes.
Release the physical, Nintendo. Put it on a cartridge so I can have every Xenoblade game in a
Release
nice
the
little
physical
row.
cut.
Release the physical of this expansion. Thank you very much.
Okay, you heard it here first,
Please
Nintendo.
Please continue.
We also didn't talk about emulators. Don't be mad at us for that if you're listening. Their ninjas are gonna come and attack us and send the Pinkertons to break our legs and take our Steam Decks. So, on that note, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Nintendo Noise. We greatly appreciate you, however you're tuned in, however you're listening to us. If you made it this far, if you listened at all, thanks for being a member of the community. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to go and become a supporter, you want to write into the show, I'll say this to all you who wrote in for the question block. We got like 7, 8 questions. Mailbag episodes coming up. Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
we'll do it next
sorry.
week or the week after when I come back or whatever. But we'll get to it on a slower week. But thank you guys so much for writing in. And if you want to write in with your thoughts on any of the stuff we discussed today, or any other stuff that you'd like to throw on, that you got a question for us, you got a main topic you'd like to suggest, whatever it is, drop us a line, questions@flipscreen.games. Come join the Discord, keep the conversation rolling between episodes. And however you choose to get involved, we really appreciate you spending your time with us and hanging out for another episode of Nintendo Noise. So, for the crew, I've been Pete, he's been Max. See you next week.
Bye.